Ever since the disappearance of my friend Alara, I've been haunted by unanswered questions. Alara was always fascinated by the unknown, often delving into local legends and forgotten tales. Her latest obsession was the village of Raven Hollow, a place shrouded in mystery and abandoned abruptly over 50 years ago. The stories spoke of sudden vanishings and eerie occurrences, but no one had ever dared to uncover the truth behind its desolation. Growing up in the quiet town of Bramblewood, Raven Hollow was nothing more than a ghostly name whispered during campfires and late-night conversations. According to old records, the village thrived until one fateful night when every resident simply left without a trace. Buildings stood silent, streets overgrown, and nature began reclaiming what once belonged to humanity. Theories ranged from natural disasters to supernatural curses, but none provided a satisfying explanation. Alara's disappearance coincided with her deep dive into Raven Hollow's history. She had stumbled upon a series of fragmented journals belonging to the last inhabitants, hinting at something sinister lurking within the village. Her last message was cryptic, mentioning a breakthrough and urging me to continue her search. I couldn't ignore the call for help, especially knowing how much Raven Hollow meant to her. Determined to find answers, I began my preparations, researching old maps, contacting historians, and reaching out to anyone who might have information about Raven Hollow became my daily routine. Each piece of the puzzle brought me closer to the abandoned village, and with each step, the shadows of my own fears grew longer. The closer I got to uncovering the truth, the more I felt the weight of the unknown pressing down on me. Finally, the day arrived when I stood at the edge of Raven Hollow. The air was thick with an unsettling stillness, and the once vibrant village now lay in ruins, cloaked in silence. As I took my first steps onto the overgrown path, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The journey ahead promised to unveil secrets that had been buried for decades, and I was both terrified and resolute to see it through. Little did I know, Raven Hollow was ready to reveal its darkest truths, and my quest for answers was only beginning. The morning air was crisp as I approached the outskirts of Raven Hollow. The sky was a dull gray, the kind that seemed perpetually stuck between night and day, casting an eerie pall over the landscape. Tall, ancient trees bordered the path, their gnarled branches intertwining overhead to form a natural archway that welcomed me into the heart of the abandoned village. As I stepped onto the overgrown pathway, the first thing that struck me was the silence. It was a heavy, oppressive silence that seemed to press against my ears, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves and the distant call of a lone bird. The houses stood in various states of decay, their wooden frames weathered and windows shattered, revealing the ghostly remnants of lives long forgotten. Vines snaked up the sides of buildings, reclaiming the structures with an unrelenting grip. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. Every step I took felt weighted with the history of the place, each footprint a reminder that I was treading on ground that had been forsaken for decades. The air smelled of damp earth and decaying wood, a scent that seemed to seep into my very bones. As I moved deeper into Raven Hollow, the path became less defined, swallowed by nature's relentless advance. My first destination was the Old Town Hall, a grand yet dilapidated building that once served as the center of community life. The door hung ajar, creaking softly with each gust of wind. Pushing it open, I was greeted by a vast, empty hall. Dust motes danced in the beams of light that pierced through the broken windows, casting long, eerie shadows on the floor. Chairs lay scattered as if abandoned in haste, and a large, cracked chandelier hung precariously from the ceiling, swaying gently. Exploring the town hall, I found remnants of the past. Old photographs taped to the walls, their edges yellowed and brittle, a rusted podium with faded inscriptions, and scattered papers that hinted at the final days of Raven Hollow. One journal, more intact than the others, caught my eye. Its pages were filled with hurried, frantic writing, detailing strange occurrences and growing fear among the villagers. The entries stopped abruptly, leaving a palpable sense of dread hanging in the air. Leaving the town hall, I wandered down the main street, passing by what used to be the local library. The building's roof had partially collapsed, and books were strewn across the ground, their pages fluttering in the breeze like ghostly whispers. I paused for a moment, sensing that I was not alone. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end as I glanced around, but there was nothing, only the empty streets and the haunting stillness. As the sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch endlessly, I felt a growing unease. The light was fading, and the village took on a more sinister appearance in the twilight. I decided to set up a temporary base in what remained of Alara's house, a small cottage at the edge of the village that she had mentioned in her last message. The house was modest, with a stone chimney and a porch overtaken by wildflowers. Inside, it was surprisingly well preserved, as if someone had left in a hurry but never returned. I unpacked my gear, carefully placing my camera and notebook on the worn wooden table. The room was filled with an oppressive stillness, the kind that made every small sound seem amplified. As I settled in, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The shadows seemed to move on their own, and the temperature dropped noticeably, sending a chill down my spine. Nightfall descended quickly, bringing with it a darkness that was almost tangible. I lit a lantern, its warm glow providing a small comfort against the encroaching night. The sounds of the village shifted in the dark, creaks, distant whispers, and the unsettling scuttling of unseen creatures. I sat by the window, staring out into the blackness, trying to make sense of the stories and the growing unease that gnawed at me. As I reviewed the day's findings, I couldn't ignore the mounting sense of dread. Raven Hollow was more than just an abandoned village. It was a place that seemed to hold its own secrets that were now starting to reveal themselves. The deeper I delved, the more I realized that the answers I sought might come at a cost far greater than I had ever anticipated. The night was far from over, and Raven Hollow was only beginning to show its true face. The first light of dawn seeped through the gaps in the cottage's boarded windows, casting long, slanting shadows across the room. I awoke with a lingering sense of unease, the events of the previous night echoing in my mind. Determined to push forward, I decided to explore more of Raven Hollow before the oppressive daylight fully settled in. Leaving Alara's cottage behind, I ventured deeper into the village, guided by a worn map I had found tucked within one of her journals. The streets twisted and turned in a maze-like pattern, each corner revealing new layers of decay and abandonment. Every step seemed to amplify the silence, broken only by the distant drip of water and the occasional scurry of unseen creatures. My first stop was the old church at the village's center. Its steeple stood crooked, leaning precariously as if burdened by the weight of untold secrets. The heavy wooden doors creaked open with a reluctant push, revealing a vast interior cloaked in darkness. Moonlight filtered through stained glass windows, casting fragmented patterns on the stone floor. Rows of empty pews stretched out before me, and an altar stood at the far end, draped in tattered remnants of what once might have been ceremonial cloth. As I explored the church, I discovered a hidden compartment beneath the altar. Inside lay a collection of dusty tomes and faded photographs, each telling a fragment of Raven Hollow's tragic past. One photograph, in particular, caught my attention. It depicted the villagers gathered for what seemed to be a celebration, their faces lit with genuine joy. The contrast between that moment and the current desolation was stark, deepening the mystery of their sudden departure. Turning the pages of one of the journals, I found entries that spoke of growing unrest and unexplained phenomena. The last few pages were frantic, detailing nights filled with unsettling noises and shadows that moved with a mind of their own. The writer, presumably one of the villagers, mentioned a presence they couldn't identify, something that seemed to feed off their fear. The entries ended abruptly, leaving a chilling gap that suggested something terrible had occurred. As I delved deeper into the church, a cold draft swept through the room, extinguishing the faint light from my lantern. The sudden darkness pressed in around me, and I felt a presence lurking just beyond my sight. My heart pounded as I strained to hear any sound, but all that remained was the oppressive silence. Summoning my courage, I switched off the lantern, embracing the darkness in hopes of conserving my limited light source. Navigating by memory, I left the church and made my way towards the village square, where the remnants of a central fountain stood dry and cracked. Nearby, an old library building loomed, its doors hanging loosely on their hinges. Inside, the air was thick with dust, and the scent of mildew was overpowering. Shelves that once held countless books were now barren, save for a few scattered volumes that seemed to have been left in haste. In a secluded corner of the library, I found a stack of letters bound together with a fraying ribbon. Carefully untying the bundle, I read through correspondence between villagers, their words revealing mounting desperation and fear. One letter mentioned sightings of strange lights in the surrounding woods, while another spoke of nights filled with unearthly cries that kept the villagers awake and on edge. As I pieced together the fragmented stories, a sense of dread settled over me. Raven Hollow had been a place plagued by more than just abandonment. It was a village that had been consumed by something far darker. The realization that these horrors had driven the villagers to flee ignited a deeper determination within me to uncover the truth. Leaving the library, I felt a sudden chill in the air, the temperature dropping noticeably as if the very essence of the village was reacting to my presence. Shadows lengthened and twisted unnaturally, playing tricks on my mind. I quickened my pace, my footsteps echoing loudly in the empty streets. Every so often, I caught glimpses of movement out of the corner of my eye, fleeting shapes that vanished when I turned to look directly. As afternoon gave way to evening, I made my way to the remnants of the schoolhouse, another key location that had likely held many of Raven Hollow's secrets. The building was partially collapsed, but inside, the classroom still bore the marks of its last occupants. Desks were overturned, and the chalkboard was scrawled with incomprehensible symbols that seemed to pulsate with a malevolent energy. In the center of the room stood a single, upright book, a grimoire perhaps, its pages open as if left in a moment of ritualistic fervor. The text was written in a language I couldn't decipher, but the illustrations depicted figures that seemed to move and shift when viewed from the corner of my eye. A sense of impending doom filled the room, and I felt an invisible force pressing against me, urging me to leave. As dusk settled over Raven Hollow, the village transformed once more. The shadows deepened, and the once faint sounds grew louder and more menacing. I knew that nightfall would bring new challenges and that the true horrors of Raven Hollow were yet to be revealed. With each discovery, the lines between reality and nightmare blurred, and the path forward became increasingly perilous. Determined but wary, I pressed on, aware that every step brought me closer to the heart of the village's dark legacy and the fate that had befallen its inhabitants. As night descended upon Raven Hollow, the atmosphere shifted palpably. The fading light cast long, sinister shadows that seemed to dance and stretch with a life of their own. I could feel the oppressive weight of the village pressing in on me, each step forward accompanied by an unshakable sense of being watched. The discoveries of the day had only deepened the mystery, and now, with darkness fully embracing the village, the true extent of its secrets began to unfold. I decided to return to Alara's cottage, hoping to find more clues that could shed light on the village's sudden abandonment. The path was barely visible under the cover of night, the overgrown vegetation creating a labyrinthine passage that made navigation increasingly difficult. The air grew colder with each step, and the sounds of the night amplified the eerie silence that enveloped Raven Hollow. Upon reaching the cottage, I noticed that something was different. The door, which had seemed ajar earlier, was now slightly ajar, creaking softly as a breeze whispered through the gaps. Inside, the dim light from my lantern revealed that the interior was untouched since my last visit. However, there was an unsettling stillness, a sense that time had frozen within these walls. I began to search the cottage more thoroughly, examining every nook and cranny for any signs of recent activity. As I moved through the rooms, I found remnants of Alara's presence. Her journal lay open on the table, its pages filled with frantic notes and sketches that hinted at her growing fear. One entry stood out, describing a presence that had begun to manifest within the village, something that seemed to draw power from the villagers' collective anxiety and dread. A sudden noise made me freeze. A faint whisper, barely audible, echoed through the room. I strained to listen, but the sound faded as quickly as it had appeared. My heart raced, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something unseen was observing me. Determined to push forward, I continued my search, hoping to find more concrete evidence of what Alara had encountered. In the back of the cottage, I discovered a hidden compartment beneath the floorboards. Inside was a small, ornate box, intricately carved with symbols that matched those I had seen in the schoolhouse. Carefully opening it, I found a collection of talismans and charms, each one seemingly imbued with protective properties. Alongside them was a letter, written in Alara's hurried handwriting, pleading for whoever found them to use these items to ward off the growing darkness within Ravenhollow. As I read her words, a chill ran down my spine. Alara had clearly been aware of the malevolent force that plagued the village, and her fear was palpable even through the pages of her letter. Determined to honor her last wishes, I carefully placed the talismans around the cottage, hoping they would provide some form of protection against whatever entity sought to claim Ravenhollow. Just as I finished, a sudden gust of wind blew through the windows, extinguishing my lantern and plunging the cottage into darkness. My breath caught in my throat as the temperature dropped sharply, my breath visible in the frigid air. The room seemed to come alive with an unseen presence, the shadows swirling and coalescing into vague, menacing shapes. I could feel the weight of countless eyes upon me, the presence pressing in with an overwhelming sense of dread. Summoning every ounce of courage, I reached for my flashlight, but my hand passed through it as if it were made of smoke. Panic surged through me as the shadows began to move more deliberately, forming indistinct figures that hovered just beyond my vision. The oppressive silence was broken by a low, resonant hum, a sound that seemed to vibrate within my very core. Desperate to maintain my composure, I focused on the talismans I had placed around the room. As the presence intensified, I felt a subtle shift in the air, the malevolent energy momentarily recoiling against the protective charms. It was a fleeting reprieve, but enough to give me hope that Alara's preparations were not in vain. I realized that the entity feeding off fear was vulnerable to these protective measures, and that gave me a strategy to confront the darkness. Determined to uncover the truth, I knew that I had to delve deeper into Ravenhollow's history and the nature of the presence that now sought to consume me. The village was not merely abandoned. It was a living entity, its very essence intertwined with the fear and despair that had driven its inhabitants to flee. As I stood in the dimly lit cottage, surrounded by the lingering shadows of the past, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. The path ahead was fraught with danger and uncertainty, but I was resolute in my quest to uncover the secrets of Ravenhollow and put an end to the haunting that had claimed so many lives before me. The night was far from over, and the true extent of Ravenhollow's darkness was only beginning to reveal itself. With each passing moment, the line between reality and nightmare blurred, and I braced myself for the challenges that lay ahead. The presence was growing stronger, and the time had come to confront it head-on, armed with the knowledge and courage I had gathered thus far. The moon hung low in the sky, its pale light casting an ethereal glow over Ravenhollow. The village, cloaked in darkness, seemed to hold its breath as I prepared myself for what was to come. The talismans I had placed in Alara's cottage offered a fragile barrier against the encroaching darkness, but I knew that to uncover the truth, I had to confront the malevolent presence head-on. Armed with Alara's journals and the knowledge I had painstakingly gathered, I made my way to the heart of the village. The path led me to the old well, a central feature that had likely been the lifeblood of Ravenhollow. The structure stood imposingly, its stones weathered by time and neglect. As I approached, the air grew colder, and an oppressive silence settled around me, broken only by the distant echoes of my footsteps. Kneeling beside the well, I peered into its depths. The darkness below seemed infinite, a void that swallowed light and hope alike. I recalled a passage from one of Alera's journals, describing how the villagers had turned to the well in desperation, believing it held the key to their salvation. Desperation, however, had only deepened their plight, drawing forth the entity that now haunted the village. Taking a deep breath, I began to chant the protective incantation Alera had transcribed from the journals. Her voice guided mine, steady and resolute, providing a semblance of courage I desperately needed. The air around me shimmered as the talisman's energy began to resonate, creating a faint barrier of light that pushed back the darkness. Suddenly, the ground beneath me trembled, and a low, resonant growl echoed from the depths of the well. The shadows around me thickened, swirling into a vortex of malevolent energy. From the darkness, a form began to emerge, a towering figure cloaked in shadows, its presence overwhelming and suffocating. The entity's eyes glowed with an unnatural light, piercing through the gloom with an intensity that threatened to break my spirit. Fear clawed at my mind, but I held firm, focusing on the incantation. The presence advanced, its form shifting and contorting as it moved with a predatory grace. I could feel its power, a dark force that fed on fear and despair, seeking to claim my soul as it had done with so many others before me. Drawing strength from Alera's words, I continued the chant, my voice wavering but determined. The talismans around me began to glow brighter, their protective energy intensifying. The entity recoiled, its form flickering as the light pushed against the darkness. I could sense its frustration, its malevolent intent growing more desperate as it struggled against the barrier I had erected. Summoning every ounce of courage, I reached into my bag and retrieved the ornate box I had found in the cottage. Carefully opening it, I took out a final talisman, a pendant imbued with the collective hope and resilience of Ravenhollow's forgotten souls. Holding it aloft, I chanted the final words of the incantation, pouring all my fear and determination into the ritual. A brilliant beam of light shot forth from the pendant, piercing through the darkness and striking the entity directly. It let out a deafening roar, its form disintegrating under the onslaught of pure, unadulterated light. The shadows that had once enveloped the village began to dissipate, revealing the true nature of Ravenhollow's abandonment. The villagers had not left out of fear alone. They had been trapped by this entity, their souls bound to the village in an eternal nightmare. As the light continued to surge, the well began to glow, its depths now illuminated by a radiant energy. The entity, now reduced to a flicker of its former self, struggled to maintain its hold but was ultimately consumed by the light. With a final, anguished scream, it was vanquished, and the oppressive darkness lifted from Ravenhollow. Exhausted but triumphant, I stood by the well, watching as the first hints of dawn began to break the horizon. The village, once shrouded in despair, now held a sense of peace that had eluded it for decades. The spirits of the villagers, finally freed from their torment, seemed to linger in the morning light, their presence a silent testament to the courage it took to confront the darkness. As the sun rose, casting golden rays over Ravenhollow, I felt a profound sense of accomplishment and relief. The truth had been uncovered, and the malevolent force that had plagued the village was no more. Yet, as I looked around at the now serene landscape, I couldn't help but feel that Ravenhollow still held more secrets, waiting to be discovered in the aftermath of its liberation. With the entity defeated, the path forward was unclear. The village was free, but the scars of its haunted past remained. I knew that my journey was far from over, and that the final chapter of Ravenhollow's story was yet to be written. As I prepared to leave the village, I glanced back one last time, feeling the lingering presence of those who had been lost and the promise of new beginnings on the horizon. The climax of my quest had been reached, but the true resolution awaited in the final chapter, where the full extent of Ravenhollow's legacy would finally be revealed. As the first light of dawn broke over Ravenhollow, the oppressive darkness that had clung to the village for decades began to lift. The golden rays of the sun pierced through the remnants of shadows, illuminating the once desolate streets with a newfound sense of hope. I stood by the old well, now glowing with a serene light that seemed to cleanse the very essence of the village. The spirits of the villagers lingered in the morning air, their presence gentle and peaceful, no longer bound by fear and despair. Exhausted yet relieved, I took a moment to absorb the transformation that had taken place. The buildings, once crumbling and overtaken by nature, now appeared less menacing, their structures revealing the beauty that had been hidden beneath years of neglect. The overgrown vegetation receded, allowing the true character of Ravenhollow to emerge. It was as if the village had been reborn, shedding its haunted past in favor of a quiet, enduring tranquility. Gathering my belongings, I felt a profound sense of accomplishment. The journey had been arduous, filled with moments of intense fear and uncertainty, but it had also been a testament to resilience and the enduring human spirit. Alera's sacrifice and the collective hope of the villagers had paved the way for this moment of liberation. As I prepared to leave, I glanced around one last time, ensuring that every corner of Ravenhollow was free from the lingering shadows that had once held it captive. As I walked down the path that led out of the village, the air felt lighter, the oppressive weight replaced by a gentle breeze that carried whispers of gratitude from the freed souls. The journey back was quieter, the sounds of nature now harmonious rather than foreboding. The memories of the night's events replayed in my mind, each one a reminder of the courage it took to confront the darkness and the importance of preserving the stories of those who had been lost. Reaching the edge of Ravenhollow, I paused to take one final look. The village stood serene, a stark contrast to the turmoil that had defined it just hours before. I felt a sense of closure, knowing that I had fulfilled my promise to Alera and uncovered the truth behind the mysterious abandonment. The path ahead was clear, but the experiences I had endured would leave an indelible mark on my psyche, shaping my understanding of fear and resilience. Driving away from Ravenhollow, the landscape transitioned from the eerie remnants of the village to the familiar surroundings of Bramblewood. The sun climbed higher in the sky, signaling a new beginning not just for Ravenhollow, but for me as well. The journey had changed me, instilling a deeper appreciation for the stories that lie hidden in forgotten places and the strength it takes to bring them to light. Once back in Bramblewood, I began to compile my findings, determined to share the true story of Ravenhollow with the world. The abandoned village was no longer a place of mystery and fear, but a testament to the resilience of its inhabitants and the power of uncovering the truth. As I documented the events, I realized that Ravenhollow's legacy was far from over. It was now intertwined with my own story, a narrative of courage, discovery, and the unyielding quest for answers. However, as I delved into my notes, a lingering unease settled in. Among the remnants of the village's history, I found a small, unmarked photograph tucked away in one of Alera's journals. It depicted a familiar face, a face I hadn't noticed before among the villagers. The eyes in the photograph seemed to hold a silent plea, a reminder that not all stories had been fully told and that some secrets might still lie buried within Ravenhollow's shadows. Determined to leave no stone unturned, I resolved to revisit Ravenhollow in the future, ensuring that every facet of its haunting legacy was uncovered and shared. The photograph served as a silent promise, a hint that the village still held more mysteries waiting to be unraveled. As I closed my journal, I felt a sense of anticipation for the chapters yet to be written, both in Ravenhollow's story and in my own journey as a seeker of truth. The aftermath of my expedition left me with a profound understanding of the delicate balance between fear and courage. Ravenhollow had been a crucible, testing my limits and revealing the depths of my determination. As I moved forward, I carried with me the lessons learned and the stories of those who had been silenced for so long. The village had been abandoned, but its legacy lived on, etched into the fabric of my being and the narratives I would share with the world. In the quiet moments that followed, I found solace in the knowledge that Ravenhollow had been freed, its spirits at peace, and its secrets partially unveiled. Yet, The discovery of the unmarked photograph hinted at a larger tapestry of mysteries, suggesting that the story was far from complete. With a deep breath, I embraced the uncertainty, ready to face whatever truths awaited me in the shadows of Raven Hollow and beyond. The journey had ended, but the echoes of Raven Hollow's past continued to resonate, a reminder that some places never truly let go of their stories. As I stepped into the light of a new day, I knew that the village's legacy would remain a part of me, guiding me toward future adventures and the endless pursuit of the unknown.